I am not ashamed to say that I love the Gelatinous Cube. It is so silly. It's so dumb. I mean, it's this big invisible boy that just slorps along the corridors and it picks up all the rubbish. I mean, it's so stupid. I love it. It's like a big fantasy Roomba. And somebody got paid to make that exist in D&D. That's why I love D&D. It's so silly.
It's deadly jello. The gelatinous cube will slowly consume your party if they aren't paying close attention for this almost translucent, slow-moving cube of death.
The gelatinous cube is basically jello that tries to eat you. Now, unless you walk into it, it's not a big deal, and usually people get out and it's not to be something to be concerned with. But if you find a gelatinous cube that is 30 foot by 30 foot and has 600 hit points, it's a totally different kettle of fish. And of course, I've seen characters die when they have to deal with a rather over-large gelatinous cube that's spent a lot of time just eating everything.
I love gelatinous cubes because it's one of those first iconic monsters that I used in Dungeons & Dragons. And I took a transparency from my work and I cut it up and I put a bunch of hot glue on it. I found some tutorial online. And the look on my player's face when I described the monster and then I was able to pull out this handmade mini and envelop him in a gelatinous cube, I'll never forget. So it's just it has a special place for me.
My theory on the enduring popularity of gelatinous cubes is the sheer amount of tactile fun you can get out of them at the table. Obviously you have minis, and whenever we get a new set of minis, I always like to see how many of them I can fit inside one of these. And but even if you don't have minis, you can do things like jello cubes and put candy skulls in them and then have fun smashing them up on your table and eating them afterward.
The gelatinous cube was always one of my favorite creatures, and every time I make Jello, I kid you not, my mind immediately moves to wanting to toss one into my next D&D game. Ranging in size, they can be found in almost any given dungeon. In essence, this thing is basically a clear skin holding in digestive juices that can, perform acid damage as they engulf a not-too-quick adventurer. These things are just flat-out fun. Well, at least for the DM.
Gelatinous cubes are great because they're one of the monsters that only really make sense in the context of tabletop RPGs. Like, they're perfectly square, just big enough to fit in a gridded out dungeon hallway. And they're invisible, except you can see things floating in them, which doesn't make sense for any other type of monster except one that's meant to be a puzzle for players rather than an actual foe to fight.
What's more iconic than a savage invisible Roomba? I love the gelatinous cube because it's only CR2, which means it can be encountered by low-level parties, and therefore more parties are likely to have the chance to fight one of these. They're invisible, so they can get the drop on parties more easily, and they introduce status effects like restrained. Plus, with their engulf ability, players might have their first experience of, not being able to breathe, which, fun for the whole family.
Gelatinous cubes are nothing if not iconic. These big blobs are great at blocking hallways, laying in pit traps, or cleaning dungeons. Just have fun with them. Hide one in a toilet for a wild surprise, or just plop them down out of the ceiling. I love that these are basically traps, just slurping around.
The Gelatinous Cube is the classic Roomba of the D&D universe. As they clear and clean up dungeons, they'll be picking up loose coins, potions, and whatever else gets dropped in the dungeon, but the real important thing is that they'll be picking up bodies of the people that they presumably slay. The fun thing about that is that there will be a skeleton walking around the dungeon, and when anybody goes to interact with this walking skeleton, they'll discover that it's actually a gelatinous cube.
Gelatinous cubes are amazing because they fit the dungeon that they're in, and I think that we too often think of them just in their square form because most dungeons are square, but a lot of dungeons aren't. You could get like a pyramid-shaped gelatinous cube or a circle if you're going into a sewer. I just think it'd be fun to play with different shapes.
Gelatinous cubes are commonly filled with a lot of the garbage and the treasure that can be found in dungeons as they go through and sweep it clean. So one of my favorite things to do is I like to put a puzzle in a game, and I will have a gelatinous cube block a corridor, and as it's coming down the corridor, the characters are going to be like, hey, wait a minute, that's what we need for the puzzle, isn't it? And they'll have to fight the gelatinous cube.
I enjoy gelatinous cubes because you don't need to have a story behind every item the players find. They can just find something that had been absorbed by a gelatinous cube and you think, oh, someone got eaten by a gelatinous cube who had a cool item at one point. Now I can have it. They're the Roombas of dungeons, keeping all the walls and floors clean, and then someone comes in tracking mud, and the gelatinous cube just has to deal with that.
Gelatinous cubes are just a staple of D&D because they're just scary. It's basically a moving mound of acid. It moves slow, but in the right circumstances, that thing can be really scary. So what I like about it a lot is that you don't just throw a gelatinous cube encounter. You have to think about it as part of a trap or some other mechanism to make things interesting.